Tonight is December 12th, 2023, and it is the 45th episode of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast. It is the 7th episode of Season 3. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, I am joined by Mike Koomar. Tonight, Mike and I will go through kind of each conference. We'll pick a team that we like or we were impressed by in that conference so far, and then we'll hit a team that has really disappointed us. So, Power 5, 4 teams each conference. We should get through kind of a lot of the teams that we've seen in college basketball this year, and we'll get to some picks after because this Saturday slate is absolutely loaded. So, Mike, it's been a while. Usually we start out with your team of the week, but we're going to go with just one team that you have been super impressed by this year, and then we can go into that conference.
Man, I mean, Sean, there's been a lot of really good surprises this year, a lot of pleasant surprises in college basketball with teams that have done way better than either you or I thought. One team that really has exceeded expectations so far this year has been Oklahoma. And we're going to talk in general, I think, a little bit when we get to the Big 12, about how many teams in the Big 12 have uniquely stood out in the out-of-conference schedule. And Oklahoma's at the top of that list. They're one of the 7 remaining unbeaten teams, and they've got 4 Power 5 wins. That's Iowa, USC, Providence, and Arkansas. Understood Iowa's not a very big win this year. We might talk about them in a little bit. But how impressive they've been. We said not to count them out.
I think we may have lost Mike there. We'll hang in there for a minute while he tries to find his way back.
Oh, yeah. Did you have a hard time hearing me? Did I list all the Power 5 wins? Okay. Okay. Did I say anything about how we talked about them in the preseason? Okay. Yeah. And how unbelievable that this turnaround job has been. They even lost a lot of good players last year with the Groves brothers graduating. They really led that offense. So Oklahoma being able to totally revitalize his team under Porter Moser, I guess it's par for the course for this guy who turned around U Chicago of Illinois, um, and being able to make them a Final Four team. So at Loyola, excuse me, but Oklahoma has so far completely shined out of what anybody expected out of them.
And Mike, we didn't talk about this before, but guess who's on the thumbnail of this podcast?
Who's that?
Javion McCollum, the best player on Oklahoma. That is pretty.
Wow.
That is pretty cool. I was
That's
gonna pick
awesome.
him, but we'll go to the Big 12 first since you said it. I will give my 2 teams now, and we'll kind of snake it. Now, there's
Yeah.
been this is a tough choice. You went with Oklahoma, who's definitely up there, but there's probably 5 teams that we could talk about here.
Oh, yeah.
And I will go to your Baylor Bears because they have been awesome, 9-0. They've
Love
got a
it.
chance to be 10-0, and they come over here to play Duke at Barclays Center. No, Madison Square Garden. They've got a
Yeah.
chance to really put themselves up at the top. They are scoring it like they did last year, and they're actually playing a little better defensively, which was kind of the reason why they dropped off a little bit after their national championship. But they're still not great defensively, still outside the top 40, but last year I think they were up in the 80s or 90s. So,
They were, yeah.
Mike, anything to
Yeah,
add about Baylor?
yeah. I mean, what's been so exciting for me to see about this Baylor team is last year they kind of lived and died by the 3-point ball. If they had a game where they were not shooting the 3 well, it wasn't that they weren't going to win. They were going to lose, like, handily, 10 points or more. And this year we've seen a resurgence in what we saw in the Baylor teams in the late 2010s, where they had really strong forwards and centers. You've seen that with Yves Misi, who's been probably the best center that Baylor's seen since maybe the 2017-2018 season. They've just looked really good. And even at their guard play, They're not just guys chucking up threes. Kind of like what you said, would like to see them play a little bit better defensively. But Baylor's already had a couple of really good wins this year. Florida is the biggest one so far. And they'll have Michigan State this weekend and Duke at the Garden coming up. So another couple of really good opportunities for the Bears.
Yeah. Obviously, like I said earlier, you have 3 of the 7 undefeated teams in college basketball from the Big 12. And then you have the number 2 team in Kansas who has 1 loss. And then BYU who has 1 loss, who's just crushed everybody they've played until their last game. We could go through them all, but we don't have the time. I'm going to turn it around first, Mike, and go to my disappointing team in this conference. And this is kind of a hard decision because the teams at the bottom were supposed to be there, and the teams at the top are doing phenomenally. I'm going to go with Texas as my disappointing team. Now, they're still in the top 25. They're still probably going to be okay, but I picked them to win the conference in our preview episode a couple weeks ago. And they have not shown much. They won at the Garden against Louisville on a prayer from Max Asmus, a contested 2, and Louisville is horrible again, if if you haven't noticed. And
way to put it.
They were supposed to be up there with Houston and Baylor and Kansas, and they are not showing that they can do that this year. They lost big in their 2 games against good teams, to UConn and Marquette. And they have a LSU at home. They'll probably win that because LSU isn't very good. But with a lot of good teams in the Big 12, you don't want to get sucked down into the middle of that conference.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of good teams in there too. So.
Yeah, Texas certainly hasn't looked like the Texas team that either you or I expected from them, Sean. It's a new look in certain elements, so I'm not surprised it would take this team a little bit to get into the swing of things. But this is also a really competitive conference, so who knows what's going to happen once we get into the thick of things in January and February.
And Texas has lost both of their good games, like we said, and Joe Mead and I have talked about this in the Big Ten. There's going to be plenty of opportunities for big wins in the Big 12, unlike the Big 10.
Oh, yeah.
So if you do kind of miss your first couple chances, well, there's going to be a ton more. They'll probably play 15-plus Quad 1 games, and it's not a very difficult path to 5 or 6 Quad 1 wins. So, Mike, why don't we wrap up the Big 12 with a team that you haven't been too pleased with this year?
Team that I haven't been too pleased with has got to be Oklahoma State right now. And given we expected Oklahoma State to be on the bottom half of the conference, I certainly didn't expect them to be this bad this year. They've had some really, really abysmal losses. They lost to Southern Illinois. They lost to Abilene Christian. They've also lost to St. Bonaventure, Notre Dame. St. Bonaventure's all right. Notre Dame is not a good team this year. So Mike Boynton's team, he's certainly going to be on the hot seat now. He's been very popular in Stillwater since he's been there. And Oklahoma State is usually overperformed expectations, but this year they're off to a really, really bad start.
Yeah, it's just, we didn't expect them to be at the top of the conference, and probably not even at the upper middle tier, probably on that bottom middle tier, but teams like Cincinnati, Texas Tech, UCF, they look like they're just a little better than the Cowboys right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sean, I know one team that we did kind of get to skip in the Big 12, I want to make sure we do them justice, is Brigham Young. I had them preseason finish ranked 13th. They just had their first loss over the weekend to a good Utah team, but they're on fire to start the year. They've had a lot of good wins. That team is well overperformed expectations.
Yeah, they're 8th in KenPom, even after the Utah loss. And they opened up at 2 in the net rankings. And it is very easy to hold on to good numbers than to chase them at the end of the year. If you're loitering in the 50s and 60s, you could be 6-12 in this conference and make the tournament if you're BYU with those numbers. So,
absolutely.
I think we both had him 13th, Mike, and that looks like it's going to be wrong. At least, maybe not first for BYU, but at this point, it would be a disappointment if they don't come in the middle of the pack.
Yeah, they're teetering towards the top half, and that would be a really, really good year for them in their first year in the Big 12.
So we're going to go to the ACC next, Mike. You went first last time, so we'll switch up the order. I'll go first and fourth. We've got a couple of teams in here ACC looks a little better than last year, at least from a depth point of view. They should have more tournament teams. And I'm going to go with the obvious one here. Clemson has been awesome. They're 9-0. They've crushed a couple really good teams. They've won a couple road games already. They beat Alabama on the road, and they beat Pitt on the road. And they beat South Carolina at home, who's undefeated until the time. They beat TCU at home, who's at least a solid team at this point. They beat Boise State. They won the Asheville Championship. They've won so many tough games. While they haven't played a elite team yet, they've passed every test that they've faced, and that's all you could ask for. PJ Hall is awesome still. He averages 20 points a game, and then Syracuse transfer Joe Girard averaging 15 points a game, and they have a couple other guys, Chase Hunter, Isaiah Shefflin. They've got themselves a ball club down there, Brad Brownell, who we've kind of said has been on the hot seat here the last couple of years. Maybe not super hot, but a bad season could make it real hot. He's off it now.
Yeah, I mean, what can you say about Clemson? An absolutely phenomenal start. And I think, Sean, we thought that they might have a solid year, but nothing to what we've seen them beating consistent Power 5 teams in the out-of-conference. And it's not like they've had a cupcake schedule either. There's a reason they're ranked 13th in the country, and that's because they've played a pretty excellent out-of-conference schedule so far. So kudos to Clemson for coming out swinging here in the season, and they probably won't be looking at being a bubble team this year, unlike they have in years past. They look excellent.
Yeah, Mike. So why don't you give us your team that you're impressed by?
Yeah, I'll be honest, Sean. There aren't a whole lot of teams that I'm super impressed by in the ACC right now, other than Clemson. You've got a lot of teams that are kind of middle of the pack. I would say Virginia's been a good team, but Virginia also has had a couple of really tight games that you wouldn't expect them. You expect them to win by double digits. So I'm going to say Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech, they came off of not really a great season last year. They've lost a couple of games. They lost to Auburn and they lost to Florida Atlantic pretty significantly. But they have looked good against Iowa State. They got a nice win there. They got a nice win against Boise State. Louisville they beat, but that's not really saying much. So in the out-of-conference, I think Virginia Tech looked like they're poised for position to potentially make a run to be in a top 4 team in the ACC this year.
Yeah, definitely. Mike Young is as good of a coach as any in that conference.
Yeah.
And it always feels like they kind of turn it around. They're definitely a better team late. They lose to a South Carolina team who has only lost to Clemson, and they lose to an FAU team who is awesome at ESPN events in Orlando. And they lose to an Auburn team that is about as hot and cold as it gets. So you can understand all those, and you can still be a good team and lose those games. And I think while they might not be in the top 25 the entire season, they'll definitely have a couple of times where they come in there because the ACC, there's definitely a lot of wins there at the bottom if you can get them. So, Mike, your turn for disappointment. A couple choices.
Yeah, there are a couple choices. I'm going to go with Duke on this one. And I will say I think it would be easy for Duke to turn it around going and coming up. They've got a couple of really good opportunities. Like we talked about earlier, that Baylor game is big. And they're going to step into a conference that really hasn't looked that great so far. But they've had losses in pretty much every big game that they've faced so far this year. Arizona, an excusable 5-point loss there. However, losses against Georgia Tech and Arkansas, a couple of games that came down to the wire, but you'd expect them to come out on top of both of those games. So especially against Georgia Tech, you would expect the Blue Devils to pull ahead on that one. So I think definitely some question marks for John Shire in the middle of his second season at Duke.
Yeah, they were struggling with Hofstra. Now they're up by 14 with 12 minutes left.
Yeah.
You'd think that they would kind of take over that game and win it by 15-20, but they haven't been great this year. They beat a Michigan State team who I'm sure we'll talk about later. And then other than that, they lose on the road at Arkansas. They lose a tough home game to Arizona, who, again, I think we'll be talking about later. But if you look at their ACC schedule, Mike, they have UNC twice, as they always do. But other than that, the 3 other ranked teams, Clemson, Virginia, and Miami, they only see once each. So you got a chance to get a lot of wins in this conference if you're Duke. And without playing a whole lot better.
Yeah, and Miami has not looked like the same Miami team for a year ago. They've certainly struggled, especially of late. So this is a very vulnerable conference, and Duke could easily run the table here and still get a 3 or a 2 seed entering the tournament. But just a little bit of a shaky start for the Blue Devils.
Yeah, there's a couple other ways I could go here, Mike, for my disappointing team. And I think I'm going to go with the low-hanging fruit, and that's Louisville.
Yeah,
They are better than last year, but,
not saying much.
I mean, they were in the 200s in Ken Palm last year. And I think they
Yeah.
are quick research. It's not how you spell Louisville. They're 176, so they played up to
Progress.
competition a couple times. They really should have beaten Texas, and they led the game for 3 quarters against Indiana. They've won their close by games instead of losing them. Like last year, they lost their first 3 games by 1 point each at home. They're winning those
Yeah.
they beat UMBC by 1, and they're winning them by 3 and 4. But
It should have beat Texas.
should have beat Texas, and you lose to DePaul, who a lot of people are crowning that game the toilet bowl because DePaul is 2-7 with that victory. Both of those jobs will more than likely be open at the end of the year, but Kenny Payne is his days are numbered.
Oh
And
yeah.
at this point, if he lasts the rest of the year, you'd have to say that that's pretty much all he's going to get. So
Oh yeah.
we are going to go to the Big East now, Mike. And I will go first. We've got a league that is pretty top heavy. So this shouldn't be that hard to pick a team because there's not really many teams who have been in the middle in the Big East.
No.
So I'm going to go to it first. I think there's a couple opportunities to go with teams that are impressive. We've got 3, really. I'm going to go with UConn. They look pretty good. They look almost as good as last year. Now, Friday's game will tell me a lot. They have just 1 loss on the year, and that is a 4-point loss at Allen Fieldhouse to Kansas, and they did have a 3 to, I think it was to take the lead with like 12 seconds left. So
Yeah.
they beat North Carolina, they beat Indiana, they beat Texas, and then every single one of their bye games has been blowouts. Not a single one less than 20 points, and that is impressive for the numbers. Stephon Castle, their highly ranked freshman, did go down. He is back. Tristan Newton has risen up to an All-American level. Cam Spencer, the transfer from Rutgers, is really good. And Donovan Clingan, while only playing 20 minutes a game, still averaging 13.2 points per game. So the Huskies, Mike, are probably as good as last year.
Oh yeah, they definitely look like they're a championship team again. You even look at some of these teams they've played in the Power Five. Indiana was a 20-point win. Texas was a 10-point win. UNC was an 11-point win. And it wasn't like these teams are fouling hacking like crazy at the end of the game. UConn controlled all of these games. They lost at Allen Fieldhouse to Kansas. Everybody knows that home court advantage at Kansas is about a 10 to 15-point advantage. So they look really good, and I think they're definitely poised to get a 1 seed in the tournament. Like we said, it's going to be a hell of a matchup on Friday. Going to Washington to take on Gonzaga. Pretty sure they're playing outside the kennel in that game, if I'm not mistaken. But
yeah, I think it's in Seattle, so it's a neutral game, but it's really not a neutral game. I mean, it's
not exactly.
Yeah.
They so that'll tell us a lot. But yeah, UConn looks like a championship contender once again.
So, Mike, you got a few choices here for your impressive team.
Yeah, I'm good with my impressive team's had a couple of losses, but they've also had arguably the toughest schedule out of conference so far this year, and that's Marquette. Man, they've been really impressive in a few games this year. They had a convincing win over Kansas, won by 14 points. They also beat Illinois. Illinois has been pretty good this year. On the road in Champaign, had a close win over UCLA. Their losses right now, a 3-point loss to Purdue and an 11-point loss at the Kohl Center against Wisconsin. But even last week I saw them take on Texas, and that game was just a disaster for the
Hey,
Longhorns.
it killed them.
They played in Austin, and that game was never close.
Yeah, Marquette's been really good. They have those 2 losses, but they have a bunch of good wins already too. So this is going to be a spread to the finish in the Big East.
Oh yeah,
Balanced schedule over there. So that will be a real interesting champion. Because UConn was the fourth place in the Big East last year until they turned it up in the tournament, and they won every game in the tournament by double digits. So it seems like that's kind of still tracking. Mike, we'll go to you for the disappointing teams. A couple teams with 4, 5, and 6 losses in the Big East. Who are you going with?
yeah. I'm going with Seton Hall in this one, Sean. We talked about a little bit of them early. Caught a little bit of their basketball this year, and they've just been incredibly disappointing. You wonder if Sheen Holloway's days are starting to get numbered um, there in West Orange. But they just haven't looked good, and they've had opportunities to look good. They've lost. They got dominated by Baylor, and then they only lost by 7 to Rutgers. But that game was a pretty dominant performance by Rutgers. We might talk about it in a little bit, but right now they've got a 7-point lead over a pretty bad Monmouth team. They lost to an Iowa team that was also really not good. They're probably one of the worst teams in the Big Ten right now. They just do not look good at all, Sean. And they've had a couple of tight games that you wouldn't expect to, like St. Peter's, for example. So um, really don't like Seton Hall right now. And the issue is that they're just so top heavy. They've got their 5 guys that they're playing, a couple of really good stars there with their guards, but they just have no presence down low and they have no bench. So if they get into foul trouble, it's over for them.
Yeah, they just don't really score enough.
No.
And that's why they lost to Rutgers. That's why they haven't been able to hang with a couple of the big teams, a couple of teams that score a lot, like Baylor and Iowa, like you said.
Yeah.
Mike, I'm going to go with a little bit of an interesting choice here, and I'm really between 2. Obviously, Xavier and DePaul have been bad this year, but I don't really think we need to talk about them. I'm going to go with St. John's. Now, they are 6-3, but I don't think that they're that's a good 6-3 for how they've played. They got run off their home floor in Rick Pitino's MSG debut by Michigan, who's proven to be all over the place.
Yeah, that's not good.
They do go 2-1 in the Charleston Classic, but they got ran by a Dayton team. And then you look at they win a road game against West Virginia. West Virginia's probably going to come in last in the Big 12.
They will,
They lose to an average at best Boston College team at the Barclays Center, which again should be a neutral game that's not really neutral. So their defense is just not there yet. They've got a wide range of players from everywhere, really. R.J. Luis, the UMass transfer, has missed a lot of time. He is really important, but they are just lost defensively, and that's really the only way to put it. They can score it. They can make shots. They just really can't guard.
Yeah, you wonder if it's just an adjustment for all these guys. Pretty much everybody's that's playing of significance for St. John's has been a transfer coming in or a recruit out of high school. So these guys obviously haven't played with each other much at all, and maybe that's why they're having so much issues on the defensive end. But, I mean, allowing 86 points to Boston College, Sean, 89 to Michigan, 88 to Dayton, that's pretty bad. They beat Utah, but they allowed 82 points to Utah. So they're giving up a lot on the defensive end, and I think that's a pretty good assessment of them. I think another team that we didn't talk about that we could have, Sean, was Villanova, who's won the games that they're supposed to win, right? Or that they're maybe not supposed to win.
Yeah.
Rather, a couple of really really good wins, but then horrible losses. I think they've lost to anybody in the state of Pennsylvania, pretty much. So Villanova, a lot of question marks for them. St. Joe's a loss, Drexel a loss, UPenn a loss, but they also beat Texas Tech, UNC, and Memphis. So
yeah, they look great in the battle for Atlantis, and then they forgot their game down there, and they came in sixth. They came in sixth place in the Big Five, which just recently became a 6-team tournament. A couple of years ago, Drexel got added, but
they lost to Drexel. Yeah.
And those are not true road games either. Penn was at the Palestra, St. Joe's was at the Pavilion, which is on your campus, and Drexel's at the Wells Fargo Center, which is where they play some of their games.
Your
And
actual home floor.
yeah,
Yeah.
so and where the 76ers play. They do have some good wins, and they did beat they fought their way to a victory against UCLA. So I do think that they'll still make the tournament. But those 3 losses, depending on where those teams end up, could be kind of important.
Those are potential quad 3 losses, quad 4 losses.
The thing is St. Joe's has really played well. They did take Kentucky to overtime. They did obviously beat Villanova, and then they beat a 9-0 Princeton team within the last couple days. So they are a top 100 team, and they might be the best team in the A10. But other than that, Penn and Drexel are mid-100s teams at best. But you crushed Memphis. You beat UNC. You beat UCLA. Things could be worse for Villanova, which is ultimately why I did go with the Johnnies. So, Mike, we'll go with Big Ten next. I don't think this is very hard at all because there's been a lot of teams in the middle and only a couple teams that have been really good or really bad. So why don't you give us the most impressive team in the Big Ten?
Yeah, I would actually go with Nebraska if they hadn't lost by 30 points to Creighton. And I think they have exceeded expectations this year, Sean. But Purdue has had a really good turnaround from that massively disappointing season last year, ending early in the tournament to Fairleigh Dickinson. They had that one loss to Northwestern. But other than that, they've looked really good quality wins against Xavier. Well, not really Xavier, but Tennessee and Alabama. So, another sport that the Big Ten is dominating the SEC in. I won't talk football here, but Purdue looks really good right now. And if Coach Painter can learn how to coach in the tournament, they might have some success this year in March.
Yeah, they'll be tight in their game against a 15 or 16 seed in the first round, but until then, I mean, they're going to roll teams. They're going to lose a couple tough road games, but they're going to win the Big Ten by a couple games at the minimum.
Yeah.
Mike, I'm going to go with Illinois is my most impressive team. There's been a lot of teams that have pulled themselves into the middle of the pack that we didn't think so, but Illinois has been really solid. They're 7-2 on the year. They do lose, that tough one to Marquette, as we said earlier. They haven't really been tripped up in any of their bye games. They win by 16 on the road to Rutgers. They put 98 on FAU at the Garden. And then they lose a real tough game at Tennessee, where one of your best players who dropped 33 the game before was 2 for 11 from the field. So, and he still competed. So I think that they are definitely the second best team in the conference right now. Wisconsin's been really good too. But other than that, it's going to be a lot of 7, 8, 9, and 10 seeds in this Big Ten.
Yeah. Illinois, I thought that they looked pretty bad in their second half against Tennessee. But other than that, they've looked really good this year. I think we had a pretty good idea that they were going to be a potentially special season for them when we saw them take down Kansas in a preseason game, fundraiser for the Maui Island right now. But they've won every game that they're supposed to by large margins, and they've won a couple of big ones. Even that Marquette game was pretty tight coming down the stretch when they lost. So, I love Illinois so far this year, Sean. Looking forward to seeing them play Missouri in about a week.
Yeah, so Mike, I'll turn it around with my most disappointing team, and 3 are really screaming out.
It's a pretty obvious one.
Michigan State is the obvious one. They are 4-5, and their season is on life support right now with Baylor on Saturday, and that is their only hope. They lost to James Madison at home, and it turns out James Madison's a pretty good ball club, but you beat Butler at home, who's been okay. But other than that, their offense is broken. They have no post presence. They don't make threes. I mean, what else can you say about Michigan State?
Completely flopping on preseason expectations. Preseason ranked 3rd. They just had so much hype around them. A good group of players coming in, and what a bust they've been so far this year.
Yep, Izzo's got to find a rotation. He's got a bunch of players. And he's even threatening to throw his son out there, which might be a little much, but
a little bit melodramatic. But
they do need to find a rotation that can at least play defense, and then we'll see where it goes from there. If they do lose to Baylor, I'm off the. I think the tournament streak will end if they lose to Baylor, which is at 25. I think this year.
I mean, they're going to have to win the conference championship or make a run through the regular season in the Big Ten in order to make the tournament. Like, they got to win 12, 13 games in the Big Ten if they lose on Saturday to Baylor, I think.
Yeah, so Mike, you got really two major choices for your disappointing team here.
Yeah, I think Iowa's the clear one for me. They looked a little bit better this past Saturday. They only lost by 10 to Michigan. I mean, that's a clear that's how I could characterize their season right now. They've played some really good teams, to be fair. They lost by 8 to a good Creighton team early in the season. Oklahoma's proven to be a good team. But, I mean, you lost by 25 points to Iowa State. And I've always been a big believer that Iowa State's been a really good, scrappy team, that Osselberger always gets his team ready for the season. But, it's kind of just been embarrassing for them. Purdue, that shouldn't be a 21-point loss. They've just looked far from anything that we've seen out of McCaffrey in the last couple of seasons.
Yeah, they are not. They don't play defense. They never have, really. No. And they're not scoring this year because they don't have somebody that's going to go in the NBA draft. Peyton Sandford is okay. He can have a good game here and there, but you cannot get 20 a game from him. It's just not possible. And Michigan was playing as bad as any team in the Big Ten, and then they go into your place and win. That just can't happen. There are some rumblings that maybe this might be Fran's last year in Iowa with his son graduating, his youngest son graduating this year, so we'll have to look out for that there. But Maryland was the other one that I think maybe, but they did win at home. Yeah. They got a conference win. They've looked dreadful this year. And Kevin Willard is, only in year 2 in the conference. So
he's going to get on the hot seat pretty soon too.
Yep, especially with the conference expanding next basketball season to 18 teams. You're not going to want to be in the 15 and 16 range there. So,
one more thing, Sean, about the Big Ten and recruiting wise. I'm going to keep this short, but how about Rutgers right now? They've got 2 of the top 3 players in the class of 24 right now. They're going to be coming in next year. I don't know how Steve Pikiell's done it, especially with their, kind of abysmal facilities there at Rutgers. If you've been out there, it's not great. But how about Rutgers being able to keep talent home in the state of New Jersey? It's been phenomenal.
It's been a good couple days to a week or plus for them because they weren't looking great. Yeah. They were a candidate for that selection if we had done this last week. Yeah. But you get a big recruit in Dylan Harper from Don Bosco Prep, same high school as Tommy DeVito, if you're a Giants fan. Yeah. But and then they beat Seton Hall. They win a road rivalry game. So, if you're Rutgers this year, I do think really no matter how this season goes, you're still going to be hyped as you can be when the season tips next year. It's not great to think like that in the college season, but it's what they're going to have to do. Last conference here, Mike, we've got the SEC, Pac-12, and others. We may hit 1 or 2 teams from there, but the SEC is one that Chuck and I previewed, and as we were kind of going through it, we were really excited for the SEC this year. Now, I think some of those expectations have to be, lessened a little bit. There are no teams. Actually, no, that's a lie. There is one undefeated team in the SEC, Ole Miss, 9-0, Chris Beard, first season. They've got a couple good players down there. And then, as I said earlier, South Carolina has 1 loss, but the teams that were supposed to be at the top of this conference have not really shown up yet this year. So
no, they haven't.
You went first last time, so I'll go first this time. My most impressive team in this conference. Oof. There's a couple candidates.
I think there's one clear one here, Sean.
Ole Miss is the answer.
Yeah.
Chris Beard is got things going down there in year 1. They have not played anybody great, but you get a road win against Temple. You win your ACC SEC Challenge game. You beat a Memphis team that's good. You get a road win at UCF. None of those are great wins, but there's a lot of solid wins in there. And you don't really have anybody tough. You have a road game at Southern Miss. But other than that, they're going to be going into the new year undefeated. They're going to be going into Tennessee on January 6th with no losses, most likely. Jalen Murray, St. Peter's product. He was a bench player in the team that went to the Elite Eight, and last year he kind of took the reins and could really take over games. You got Alan Flanagan, who is back after a couple years of injury. He's averaging 18 a game. Mike, Ole Miss, at this point, should at least make the tournament.
Oh, yeah. Ole Miss, this is – if Chris Beard can make the tournament in his first year, which if they play anything like they are in the out-of-conference, they will do, this is a remarkable turnaround in Oxford, Mississippi for a program that has been pretty bad in the last 5 or 6 years. So definitely making himself known as an early candidate for Coach of the Year in the SEC. We obviously know what happened with him. Yeah, maybe nationally too. We know what happened with Chris Beard in Texas last year, but it is really good to see him when he got that second chance to really take charge and lead Ole Miss to being as good as they are. It's really impressive.
Before we go,
Sean,
before we go to the next
ahead.
team, Mike, is Chris Beard the coach of Ole Miss next year?
Ooh, that's a good question. That's a really good question. I'm going to say yes, because I think if Chris Beard does that well, Ole Miss will find a way to keep him around. They've got the money, they've got the resources there in Oxford to keep him around for at least one more year. So I think he will. He's a Texas guy, so I'm sure at some point he'll find a way to coach back in the state of Texas. But that's not going to be next year, and it's not going to be the year after that.
Yeah, Mike, so why don't you go with your impressive team? You could go a couple different ways with this one, because there's not a definite one.
Certainly not a definite one. I guess if I had to go with one, I'd go with South Carolina, who's 8-1 right now. That's a team that really has looked very poor since they made that Final Four run in 2016. But with that being said, this year they've gotten off to a really good start. Remember, their season actually ended in the SEC tournament last year. No postseason play for them, but a nice close win against Virginia Tech. Things got a little close for them against DePaul, which they shouldn't have. But they took care of Notre Dame. Their only losses right now to a really good Clemson team, and that was a 5-point loss. So what South Carolina's done so far this year has been really successful. But I'm going to say the SEC in general, Sean. I guess I'm next in disappointments. How about the entire conference? Has really been disappointing. I think we expected to see a lot out of Kentucky, who's they've been all right so far, but and Tennessee's been solid, but a lot of schools that we really thought were going to do well, like Missouri, has really flopped this year. So this has not been a really talented conference.
Yeah, the Big Ten was the team that did not start, or the conference, not the team, the conference that did not start off the season well, and I think they've kind of rebounded from that with Purdue winning Maui, Illinois, winning a couple games, Wisconsin beating Marquette. I do think the SEC is now at the bottom of the Power Five, unfortunately. Even below the ACC. Now, they have a ton of teams that are still going to make the tournament. But other than that, I'm going with Arkansas as my disappointing team. I did pick them to win the conference in our SEC preview. Yeah. And you just thought that, this was... They have different players from last year, but this is the same product that they put out last year. They look really good a couple games. They lose to a team they shouldn't. They lose to Greensboro, 1-2 in Atlantis with a double overtime win against Stanford that they should have lost, and Stanford's not a very good team. You do have a win against Duke, so if Duke does turn it around, that will be okay. You had a good chance to beat Oklahoma in Tulsa, but Oklahoma's just better than you right now, and that's kind of the way it is. You've got a couple... You look at their scores, and we talked about in the preview how they should have 6 or 7, 8-plus point the game scores.
Yeah.
And they only have 5 right now. So need to see a little more from the Razorbacks.
Yeah, the Must Bus is struggling a little bit early this year, Sean, especially with how good we thought they would be. I will say I think Tennessee's been pretty good so far this year. They had a great second half against Illinois, really shut them down defensively. But I think as a whole, this conference has really not been what we expected them to be.
Yeah, so who are you going with for your disappointment, Mike? Because I'm going to put out a graphic.
Yeah. I mean, Sean, I
Plenty of
think I'm gonna.
choices.
There are
You
so
could
many
just say the whole
choices.
conference that's not Ole Miss.
Yeah, I'm gonna say Alabama, Sean. I think Nate Oates' team. We really thought that they would be putting forth a better product so far this year, and they've had a couple of really tight losses. They lost to Clemson, they lost to Purdue. Those are good losses. Ohio State's not a good loss this year, and they played Oregon close. I don't think that's really a very good one either. Um, so I'm going to say Alabama. I really expected to see a little bit better performance on the court. Not to say that if they lose to Clemson and Purdue that's okay, but Ohio State's not a good loss.
Yeah, Alabama did hang with Purdue, but they hit like 19 threes or something, and they still lost. So,
Yeah,
and Ohio State looked like they might be a little better than last year, but they did lose to Penn State. They still are better than last year at Ohio State, but
yeah.
definitely no better than like a 7 seed right now, or at all. So that's our Power 5 conference preview, Mike. We're at 41 minutes right now, so we got picks to do after this. Why don't you give one more team that you've been impressed with that we haven't mentioned from a conference yet, and then I'll give a disappointing team.
We haven't talked about James Madison at all, Sean, but James Madison's been incredible this year. They're undefeated. They had that signature win against Michigan State early in the year, followed that up with a pretty wild finish against Toledo. Probably the craziest finish in college basketball this year, but they ended up getting the win there, and they've been on an undefeated chase through the Fun Belt. So we'll see how they can do when they get to the conference season, but I like their chances to potentially nab a 7 seed or better.
I do think at this point, they're the best bet to be the last team undefeated. They do not really
Yeah.
have any tests until the conference season rolls around. Pac-12, I'm going to go to for my disappointment here, and it's going to be the USC Trojans.
Yep.
They're in the news
Yep.
for Bronny coming back. They lost that game to Long Beach State. They've lost 4 times now. Lose to UC Irvine in a bye game. You have some definite NBA players that are not named Bronny James on that team. And
Yeah.
if he turns it around and he leaves too, you just should be a better team with that many NBA players. It's really that simple. Collier is really, really good. He's probably going to be the number 1 pick. And you still got Boogie Ellis there, and you got Bronny. Like, you should be better. Now, they might turn it around, but they're my disappointment so far because, they were in the top 25. They're supposed to be better.
Yeah, yeah. I would argue, aside from Michigan State, USC is probably the most disappointing team so far in the entirety of college basketball.
Yeah, so Mike, we've got picks to wrap it up as we did last year. We're going to keep track of these all season and see where we end up. Don't remember off
Who
the
won
top
last
of
year,
my
Sean? Who won?
I don't remember. It was
I think
probably
I did.
you. You were leading, but we've got a unbelievable Saturday slate, Mike. It kind of stinks that there's 3 NFL games on Saturday also, because
Yeah, no kidding.
this was supposed to be college football's day, or college basketball's day, kind of like last Saturday was, with really Army Navy being the only college football game on. But every
Maybe.
every channel will have a college basketball game on it at some point. But we're actually going to start Friday night in Seattle. It's UConn heading out there to play Gonzaga. Neutral game, but not a neutral game, Mike. We'll go to you first here for this one. Who you got?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Gonzaga on this one. I think UConn is probably a better team if you're on an actual neutral court, but this game's going to be a packed sellout crowd in Seattle. They love their Zags out there, and Gonzaga's looked really good this year. I think we've really underestimated the talent that's come out of them this year because, one, we expect it now, and two, we've seen Nebraska or Gonzaga flop a little bit in the postseason, but I like Gonzaga a lot.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the Huskies. I do think that this is as close as it gets.
Yeah.
There'll be another game in this slate that I say that too, but UConn I think is a better team, but it will be an away game. They fought real hard at Kansas and they had a chance to win it. I think if they have a chance to win it, I think they'll take it. So for me, the Huskies, that's at 10 o'clock on Friday night, 10 o'clock Eastern time, that is, on ESPN2. We'll turn the page to Saturday, 12:30, Mike, at the Carnegie Hall of College Basketball. Number 2, Kansas goes into Bloomington to play the Hoosiers. Kansas has been really good this year. Indiana's been a mixed bag. This is going to be an interesting one. I'll go first here. I want to pick the Hoosiers.
Do it. You got to.
Week of rest. You get run off the floor by Auburn. You had a spirited defensive effort in your last home game, so I'm going to say you're going to do it again. We don't do scores here, but 69-64 Hoosiers.
Man, I love it. I love it. I'm going to go with the Jayhawks here. I still think that they might be the best team in college basketball despite their loss a couple weeks ago. But I'm going to go with the Jayhawks, get a signature road win in the out-of-conference.
So next game, Mike, we're going to go to 2 o'clock Eastern time at Little Caesars Arena in Detroit. Another pretend neutral game that's not really neutral. That's
Not
Baylor
neutral,
going to Detroit to play Michigan State. Sparty needs this bad, but Baylor might be as good as any.
Yeah, Baylor's had a cushy rest to take care of final exams. I like the Bears in this one. I think it's going to be actually a really close game, Sean. I think Michigan State's going to throw more punches than we expect at the Bears, but at the end of the day, I think the physicality and the forwards for the Bears are going to get the job done for them.
Yeah, Michigan State will be desperate. That affects teams a lot differently. I'm going to break our streak, Mike, of going against each other. I think Baylor gets it done, and it's kind of the knockout blow for the Spartans this year.
Yeah,
because there's only so many opportunities for great wins in the Big Ten. Next game, Mike, we've got 2:30 on ESPN2. We've got the Aggies from Texas A&M heading up to Houston to play at the Toyota Center. Again, another pretend neutral game that's not really neutral to play the Houston Cougars. Not at the Fertitta Center, but it is in Houston. Houston's been awesome this year. Texas A&M hasn't been too bad themselves. I'm going to go with Houston here.
Yeah, I think that game, Sean, is going to be a lot more neutral than we think, just because of how many C-Stat alums are going to be in Houston. But I'm going to go with Cougars as well. I think this game could be close, but Houston's got too many players that can change the game on their end. I like them to roll in this one.
3 o'clock, Mike, on ESPN Plus. The fact that this game is not on TV tells you as much of how great a day of hoops this is. We've got number 13, Clemson. We talked about them before, 9-0, going to the FedEx Forum to play Memphis, who's 7-2, and they've been another team that's been really good this year.
I can't believe that game's on national TV.
It says ESPN Plus on the ESPN app right now. So
that's shocking.
This is a really good game. Memphis has been awesome. They just got Naquan Tomlin from Kansas State. He will not be eligible until January 16th, but Memphis is really good. They've really competed. They just beat Texas A&M on the road. They beat VCU on the road. They lost a tough one at Ole Miss, and then their only other loss is Villanova. They won on the road at Missouri. They beat Arkansas. They beat Michigan. Memphis is a really good team, but so is Clemson. So who you got?
I'm gonna go with Memphis in this one. This is gonna be the toughest road challenge that Clemson's had so far this year. I think the FedEx Forum is gonna be packed, and Memphis is battle tested this year. They've played a lot of really good out of conference games. You kind of need to this year in the American Conference, but I like them to win this one.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm gonna go with Clemson. I just think PJ Hall is gonna be too much for them to handle. Dandridge, is he going to be able to cover him? I mean, he could use his fouls, but other than that, I don't really know. I'm going to go with Clemson, but I kind of want to watch this game, but you really can't unless you have 6 different screens on, because
right.
You got a bunch of good games now. Probably the headliner of the day, Mike. We've got FA. No, I'm kidding. We've got Arizona going to Indy to play Purdue in another neutral game that's not really neutral. This is the Indy Classic at the Gainbridge Fieldhouse, the home of the Indiana Pacers. This is at 4:30 on Peacock. This is a game that really could go either way.
Yeah, and this could be the game of the preseason in college basketball. I mean, this is the two powerhouses right now at this season. Look, I'm going to go with Arizona right now. Arizona looks like the best team in college basketball, and are they going to be able to handle Edey? We'll see on an Indiana home court essentially. But like you said, this is a game that could go either way. I think Arizona is going to knock it out.
Yep, Arizona's been pretty spectacular. 9-0 or 8-0. They play defense this year. They didn't in past years. But
Yeah.
Purdue, Ballo maybe can hang with Edie, but Edie fouls everybody out, at least not out of the game, but they definitely have to play less minutes because of it. And I don't know what Arizona's got at that position at the backup five because kind of Ballo's everything that they've seen. It'll be a really close game. I'm leaning towards the Boilers, but this is going to be a great one.
Yeah. Battle of two teams that wet the bed at round one of the NCAA last
That
year.
is right. Princeton and Fairleigh Dickinson at the hands of New Jersey schools. So
Love it.
5:30 p.m. on CBS is the CBS Sports Classic from the State Farm Arena in Atlanta, the home of the Atlanta Hawks. We've got number 9 North Carolina facing number 14 Kentucky. Both teams have looked good at times and pretty bad at times this year, Mike. I'm going to go first. I think Kentucky has the bodies to beat North Carolina here, and I'm leaning slightly towards the Wildcats.
Yeah, I haven't seen much UNC basketball this year. The only game I saw was them narrowly. Well, it turned into a little bit of blood at the end, but playing Lehigh really tight this year. So they've really been inconsistent this year. With that being said, they've had a couple of really special performances that they turn, including a nice win against Tennessee. So I'm going to go with the Tar Heels of this one.
So we've got one more game here, Mike. We've got Alabama going to Creighton. This is an opportunity for a season-changing victory for Alabama. Creighton has looked pretty good. You giving the Tide any chance?
I think it could be a good game. I say could, but I think Kalkbrenner and Creighton are going to be too much. I think that the Jays are going to win by double digits.
Yeah, I would have to say so, too. I think maybe Alabama takes a lead, maybe gets an 8-10 point lead, but Creighton will defend well enough to win the game, and Alabama won't. So we've got a couple other great games on Saturday too that we can't go through. We've got a couple good games Sunday too, USC, Auburn, but we're just gonna have to leave it there at this point. We should be back to regularly scheduled programming. We should have some more interesting videos coming out during the holiday break because there's not a ton of action there. I did a Sporkle video a couple of weeks ago. Joe Bede's going to give that a try. Mike, maybe we could get you on there, see how many teams you can name.
Let's see it.
A lot of views on that one. So we might have to give somebody else a shot at that one. But we're going to keep doing the picks. We're going to keep a total for the entire season, and hopefully a couple other graphics because there's not a ton of games to talk about this week. But Mike, I think that's all we have for him today, unless you want to add anything.
Yeah, that's all I got, Sean. It's going to be a fun weekend of college hoops, and we'll pick it up next week with some more good games.
So be sure to check out Joe Mead and I on In a Nutshell if you haven't already, and then Mike and if anyone else joins us here on Sports Daily College Basketball. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Peace.